my name is Marna Wally, and my email's on the cover. If you have any questions about migration or anything at all, please just email me. I want to make sure that your migration goes smoothly, and I want to make sure that you're moving up to the latest and greatest at all times, right? So with that in mind, I just want to have a show of hands to see who's in the audience. Who right now is on z/OS release 12 somewhere in their enterprise? Fabulous. Who? Up, way over there. OK. What about z/OS release 13? Who's on z/OS? A lot of people on 13. Excellent. And you need to be here because you need to get off of 13 and onto 2.2. So this is a good place to be. What about z/OS 2.1? A lot of people. Excellent. OK, so it looks to me like it's about half and half. So that's good. So what I wanted to talk to you today, first part of the presentation is going to be about the planning information for z/OS 2.2. And there's a lot of information in here, actually a lot of technical information as well, on things that you can do now for your z/OS release 13 system to go to 2.2, or to get from z/OS 2.1 to 2.2 as well. Okay, so you're in the right place. This is stuff that you can do to prepare right now. I did want to start off talking a little bit about the content of 2.2, mostly just very briefly about some added stuff. I'm not John Eales, and I don't talk about all the exploitation stuff, but when we do add a new element into z/OS, sometimes from an installation point of view, I'd like to talk about it to tell you what it did to the installation and migration path. Changed elements, sometimes changed elements have new functions, sometimes the new function brings migration actions. So I do want to mention a little bit about the changed elements and the items that are withdrawn. Okay, so that's the best thing that you can do now in your planning for the new release, is to understand what isn't there in 2.1 and in 2.2 and start planning for alternatives now on your release 13 or on your 2.1 system. And I've even got a look ahead slide so that you can see what's going to come out in the release after 2.2. Okay, for convenience sake, I'll just call that in this session 2.3, even though that's not what it's, we haven't said what it's going to be called, but I'm just going to use that for convenience sake, 2.3, what will be out in that release, and maybe even in the future after that. Okay? And then we'll talk a little bit about ordering and deliverables. I won't spend very long on this, but we do have a lot of program products that might be very helpful for your migration in order to help you get to z/OS 2.2. We'll talk about those. I'll briefly talk about the policies, mostly because it hasn't changed in such a long time. But I do want to show you, just from disclosure, what's happening in 2.2, end of service dates, and also the coexistence policy, so that it's clear for everybody what's coming in z/OS 2.2. And then we have the last half of the presentation for part 1 is all about requirements and assistance in installation. So we'll talk very briefly about driving system and target system coexistence systems. I want to talk a little bit about doing programmatic verification of migration actions now on z/OS release 13 and on z/OS 2.1. And you guys should all know, when I say the word programmatic verification, what comes to your mind is health checker, right? Okay, so we've got health checker, a lot of health checks coming in z/OS for 2.2 migration. And also we have using the z/OSMF workflow for migration. Now this is a key thing because, as you know, we provided a workflow previously for z/OS 2.1, but I want to spend some time talking about what we've got for 2.2 workflow for you as well. Okay? So first of all, for the scope, I'm not going to talk about hardware migration information. If you're interested in going to a Z13 server, you really need to either look in the migration book. The level of the book you'll need is at least the -03 level, if not higher than that. Or you can go attend the session, which I think has already happened at Share here, which was the z/OS support for the Z13 as well. So I'm not going to talk about hardware positioning. I've only got 2 hours, and I need to take all of it up with the operating system itself. Okay? Oh, is it tomorrow? OK, so Greg's going to give z/OS support for the IBM Z13 tomorrow. Okay. So here in one slide, I wanted to kind of encompass what's changing in z/OS, which is very hard to do because in z/OS 2.2, we've had a lot of development, a lot of new enhancements to it, and so I wanted to kind of show in one chart what it is. So I've got a lot of things happening in the key to this chart. So you'll see underlined means that it changed in z/OS 2.2. So if you're coming from 2.1 to 2.2, you need to look at the underlined things. That's what you're going to see changing. If you're coming from z/OS 2.1 or z/OS release 13 to 2.2, then you need to also accompany or accommodate the changes that happen in z/OS 2.1, and those are the not underlined items that you can see on here. And if it's green, it's a priced feature, and if it's black, it is just a base element. And if it's a strange brown color that you can see here, that is a security feature. It's a non-priced feature that you would need to order. So just not to go through this whole list in its entirety, I did want to point out a couple of things. The cryptographic services level that we have into the base of ZOS 2.2 is HCR 77 Baker 0. Because, excuse me, I'm going to talk the FMIDs for crypto because it's the only way I can keep track of them. They have so many of them. The FMID is the way that I can understand them best. Okay? So it's HCR 77 Baker 0 that is in ZOS 2.2. Also, you'll see some new symbols that we have here. We have 5 new elements. If you're coming from ZOS release 13 up to 2.2, you'll see 5 new base elements, and if you're, or 5 new elements. And if you're coming from ZOS 2.1 to 2.2, you'll see 3 new elements coming in. And everybody should know exactly what they are because John talked about them, but I'll talk about it from an installation point of view in just a second. So we can see here that we have HTTP server powered by Apache, or what we call IHSA. We have the Ibm Knowledge Center for ZOS. That's called, for short, KC4Z. We have the ZOS Management Facility, which I know you know about that already, and that's coming in as a base element. That's new. We have the ZOS OpenSSH base function. We'll talk about that. And then one that came in ZOS 2.1 was the Z Enterprise Data Compression priced feature that was available in 2.1. Okay, so this is just an overview of the things that are changing and what the content you see coming in and out of the release based on where you come from. So first of all, one quick slide about ZOSMF. ZOSMF, you don't need to order it anymore because it's going to be in ZOS 2.2 base. Okay, you'll see I just took a screenshot of the very first panel of ZOSMF, and you can see that it has a new look now. Okay. If you were at the ZOSMF lab this morning, you would have noticed that the welcome screen didn't look exactly like this. But I can get around pretty well. It's actually OK. Even though it has a new look, it's still pretty easy to get around in it. Previously, it was its own program number, as I said. And now that it's a base element, you don't have to order it. Also, its use is going to require 64-bit Java 7.1. And that is not included in ZOS. So what you'll see is a bypassable requisite when you go to order ZOS 2.2 for the 64-bit Java 7.1. If you want it, you just order it along with it, and if you don't want it, it's bypassable, and you can take it off your ordering checklist on Shop C. Okay, so we're trying to help you by making it a bypassable requisite so you don't forget to order it because ZOSMF does need that level of Java. Okay, and in fact, other levels of products need that same level of Java as well. I'll show you about that in a little while. Okay, so the question is, does it work on version 8 of Java for ZOSMF 2.2? And the answer is, it was tested with 7.1, and that's the level that it requires, and so that's the level that you should use with it. Okay, the next base element is ZOS OpenSSH. You probably know this one already. This is a same level that's available in the IBM Ported Tools product that we have that was a non-priced feature, or non-priced product, excuse me. And it has a couple of utilities in it. The two that I think are probably the most interesting that you might know is SSH and SFTP. Okay, that's where you get it from for our ZOS product, okay? So we're putting that now into the ZOS 2.2 product. The level that we're incorporating into ZOS 2.2 is the OpenSSH ported level 6.4 P1. Okay, now if you're into the ported levels of this product, you know what that means. Previously, what was in the Ported Tools product on the prior level was 5.0 P1. So I'm just going to tell you right now that the ported level changes, 5.0 P1 to 6.4 P1. There are some incompatibilities in that. Okay, now this is an open product that we just ported in, and so they don't have also the necessary rigidness that we necessarily have in ZOS about upward compatibilities, as you guys know, when we take something that's a ported thing and we port it. So there are some migration actions associated with them, and some of them are not small. Okay, and this is because of the port level that we've included. Okay, so I'll talk about the ported migration actions in part 2 for OpenSSH, but just be aware at this point that they are different than what is previously in the old level of the ported tools. Okay. A new base element in 2.2 is the IBM Knowledge Center. This is called KC4Z, and this is a web application that will allow you to deliver your product publications through the web, through a browser, if you wish. Now, this is a Java web application that is going to be deployed with the WebSphere Liberty Server, and it uses the WebSphere Liberty Server that we already package within ZOSMF. So you're not getting a separate physical copy of this. The KC4Z is going to use Liberty that is in ZOSMF. It's just going to make its own instance of it. Okay? So you can have search technology similar to what's used in Information Center. You can create your own local repositories in KC4Z. Actually, what I'd recommend you do, if you want to set this up, use your ZOS 2.2 server pack and use the jobs that are provided in the full system replace path in order to set up and get using your KC4Z. It's not that hard to do. If you use the jobs that are in server pack, it will help you. Okay, now the next one, which is not such an easy one, and this is the one that I really want everyone to understand in part one. This is the big thing to take away from this session, is that we have the IBM Http Server powered by Apache has been incorporated into ZOS 2.2, and we have removed the older, the very much older, the IBM Http Server powered by Domino. That one was very old, and we've taken the Domino out one, and we've put in the IBM Http Server powered by Apache, or we just call it IHSA. Okay, now what level is in ZOS 2.2? It's a new level that's not found today anywhere else. The IHSA level is 9.0.0.0. Okay, now you don't have that anywhere. WebSphere doesn't ship that level today. Nobody else ships it within IBM today. We have the highest level right now in ZOS 2.2, 9.0.0. Well, what Apache level is that? That's Apache level 2.4. So associated with IHSA, there's a lot of release levels you got to understand. There's ZOS 2.2, there's Apache level 2.4, and then there's the level that we call it also, which is 9.0. So the same level is really referred to almost 3 different ways. Okay? So just keep that in mind. It is a little bit confusing. Okay? Now the ported tools, IBM ported tools has the IBM HTTP server powered by Apache IHSA level, but its level is the 855 level. Okay, now remember when you come into 2.2, we're going to have the 9.0 level, which is a higher level. So what can you do? You can get the ported tools level that's at 855, and you can do a lot of the migration work today to get from Domino to Apache 855. So people have done that, and we've decided that we will also offer a migration accommodation. This is brand new news in this area, just been decided, is that if you want to use IHSA with ZOS 2.2, and you're already on the path of doing the work from getting from Domino to IHSA 855, and you've got that all up and running, and you want to run IHSA 855 on ZOS 2.2 while you complete your 2.2 migration, that will be allowed from this on. This is new information. So this will be provided to you, and you're allowed to have this migration accommodation while you'll have dual IHSAs, 855 and 9.0 on 2.2, and that will be provided for up to for 3 years until ZOS 2.1 goes end of service. Okay, so this is to offer you some comfort and some migration accommodation so that on your migration to 2.2, you don't necessarily have to immediately worry about moving from Apache 855 to 9.0 because you'll have a little bit of time to complete that migration after you've moved to 2.2. Okay, question?
PTF UI 28565 against the ported tool version that you want to have that to do the migration.
Okay, so there's a comment that there's a PTF on the ported tools for 855 UI 28569, and that PTF is helpful on the migration to get from 855 to 9.0. Thank you. Okay, so speaking of this, because I think this is a very important migration action for 2.2. In fact, it's the biggest migration action for 2.2. And so I have some strongly suggested migration recommendations in this area, and I strongly recommend you use this as the migration path, okay, to get off of Domino and onto the Apache IBM HTTP server. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is decide, are you affected by this migration action? Are you using the IBM HTTP server powered by Domino. Now, you know, I like functions in ZOS, but if you're not using the function, life gets a whole lot easier because you don't have to worry about it. So the first thing you need to do is decide, do I have this Domino HTTP server running on my system, and am I affected by its removal? Okay. Now, the best way to do that is we wrote a little health check, and it's a very simple health check. It's not provided in the product. It is provided from our migration and installation web page. So you need to go to this migration and installation web page and download this very simple health check. There's instructions on the page that will tell you how to add it into your health checker Parmlib member, so you can add the check into the backbone of health checker to get it to run. You simply look at the output of that check. And if that check says it's successful, then you don't have to do anything on this slide, okay? And you're actually sitting pretty for going to ZOS 2.2. But if you run that health check and it comes back with an exception, okay, now we need to talk about the rest of the activities on this slide. And you need to plan for that today. You need to plan for that while you're on 13. You need to plan for that while you're on 2.1, because you need to plan for that and you need to get that moving. This might be a lot of work. Okay, this is not a small migration action if you're affected by this. Okay, so let's look at item number 2. So let's say you run the check and it says that you are affected by this because you are running the Domino HTTP server. You need to get off of it. This is what you do today while you're on 13 or while you're on 2.1. You go order the IBM ported tools. It's called version 1.3 HTTP server feature, and that is the 855 level, or also known as Apache 2.2. Okay, because remember we have a lot of levels for this level of the code. So you install that, you put it up, and you start moving from Domino to Apache 855. Very important to do. Now, what resources can help you do that? Because that may not be a small task. I'm going to be honest with you, there's a lot of work, and depending on what you've used in the Domino HTTP server, it may be a whole lot of work, because there may not be a replacement Apache HTTP server, and unfortunately, I hate to say it, you might have to rewrite applications, and that's not what I like to say when I'm standing up here talking about migration, is the word application and changes. I don't like to say that. But unfortunately, in some cases, you might have to rewrite an application if it was using a Domino function that is not found in Apache. But you need to understand that today when you're on 13 and 2.1. Okay? Because when you get to 2.2, there is no Domino there. I'm telling you, it's not there. It's not going back in. So you need to get off of it before 2.2. Okay? So the big stepping stone is to get from Domino to 855 today, right? So that's what you do. You use this red book that I have here. The red book has been updated at least twice in order to have updates that we have found or hints and suggestions. So use this red book that's called Migrating from Domino to Apache. Okay, that red book is going to be your best friend while you're doing this migration. Also, there is a Unix Tools and Toys called the IHS CMT. And this little tool will generate some sort of an approximation between the two HTTP configuration directives from Domino to Apache. It can help you do that if you need to do it. Okay, so that little tool might help as well. Another thing to keep in mind is that you can run on ZOS release 13 and 2.1 the Domino and the Apache 855 servers concurrently. And in fact, if you're using the InfoPrint server, the InfoPrint central function of the InfoPrint server, that's exactly how you have to run, because InfoPrint server, InfoPrint central function does not support Domino. It does not support Apache yet on 13 and 2.1. The InfoPrint central function will not support Apache until you get to 2.2. So you're going to need to run side by side on ZOS release 13 or 2.1, the Domino and the Apache 455, definitely if you've got the InfoPrint server, InfoPrint central function, but also if you have other things, applications in your site that you need to, move them over one at a time, one from Domino, moving it over to Apache. You can run them side by side on 13 and 2.1. Okay, so that's clear. That'll help. Okay. Okay, so now let's say you've got that all done. You've got all of your Domino applications moved over to Apache, everything's fine. The only reason why you have Domino around anymore, maybe it could be because you're using InfoPrint Central, that's okay. Then what you do is you move to ZOS 2.2. Okay, now what happens on 2.2 is we're going to give you that new Apache level 9.0, right? And that's even higher than what you had in ported tools. So what you do in 2.2 is you do the migration work to move from 8.5.5 to 9.0. And I'm going to tell you that it's not a lot of migration work. There are not a lot of changes between 8.5.5 and 9.0 Apache. This is not at all as big as it is from getting from Domino to Apache in the first place. That's a big step. Getting from Apache 8.5.5 to Apache 9.0 is not such a big step. Yes, there are changes. Yes, you need to do things, but it's not at all as big as going from Domino to Apache. Okay? So then you do the migration actions associated with getting from Apache 8.5.5 to 9.0. What do you do for that? Well, there's a paper that's out there that you can read it, and that paper, unfortunately, is titled Upgrading from to 2.4 from 2.2. That doesn't make a lot of sense to us, right? But remember, this is an Apache ported information, and so the Apache migration actions are written in Apache levels, which means you're going from 2.2 to 2.4. But in our minds, we know that means Apache 8.5.5 to 9.0, or it means something like ported tools to ZOS 2.2, right? So you'll see you have to follow the paper that says upgrading from 2.2 to 2.4. That's the stuff that you find for the 8.5.5 to 9.0 migration. Also, there's a general process if you want to know how to move from one Apache level to another. And that is on this website that you can see in number 3, the second bullet for number 3 that you can see there. This paper is a little bit confusing, though, because it doesn't mention ZOS. It just talks about IBM Http Server in general terms. It doesn't talk about 9.0, and it doesn't use the word ZOS. But in general, it will tell you how you can move from one level to another. So read that and decide how you would do that migration if you want to follow the recommendation in that paper. OK. Then when you're on 2.2, then you can start have InfoPrint Central, InfoPrint Server, InfoPrint Central. Then that can start using IBM Http Server 9.0. There's also some other functions within ZOS that need this higher level of Apache, and that would be PKI, Public Key Infrastructure, and Library Server as well. Okay? So you might have to make some very small changes to PKI and Library Server in order to run IHSA 9.0 on ZOS 2.2. Okay, now at the bottom of this chart is really important because then we have this new information here is if on step number 3 you still want to run 8.5.5 that you had run back in step number 2 from ported tools, if you want to just bring that ported tools level forward to ZOS 2.2, where you've already done that migration work from Domino to 8.5.5 Apache, you can run that if you want to. Remember, until the ZOS 2.1 goes end of service, gives you about 3 years. You can run that way and have both of the servers on ZOS 2.2 while you're doing that small migration work from 8.5.5 to 9.0 as well. Okay? Now, let me warn you at this point, you're not going to be able to order the IBM HTTP Server 8.5.5 with ZOS 2.2. If you want to use this accommodation, you're going to have followed this migration path here, which I strongly recommend, and you would have obtained your HTTP Server 8.5.5 from ported tools, right? So it's not going to go into the ZOS 2.2 zone. In fact, that is superseded and deleted in SMP terms, and it won't go into the SMP 2.2 zone. That means you've got to use it from your ported tools zone. That means you've got to get it from before, and you can't order it with 2.2. So that's how we're being very serious that we want you to move up to 9.0, okay? Is that we're not going to allow it to be in there, but you can have it in another zone and other data sets, and you can use it concurrently if you need to for that limited period of time, okay? But I would strongly recommend if you can get from 8.5.5 to 9.0 right on ZOS 2.2 and you don't need the migration accommodation, then that's a fine thing, okay? Okay, so any questions about this? This is a really important aspect of getting to ZOS 2.2, and I think everybody should understand this. Question?
Not a question, but a general
comment.
I did through a page of the documents to IES, and one place that I found very helpful is the IBM Developer forums.
Okay.
Like Eric Cuminer, frequent that.
Yeah. An excellent comment I'm going to repeat is that he has unfortunately lived through the Domino to HTTP server. And you don't have any gray hair. You look very young after that migration. But he said that a very good resource that actually I should put on this chart is also using IBM Developer Works, and that is absolutely true. The guy that is the IBM HTTP server guy in IBM is Eric Kovner, and he hangs out on DeveloperWorks. And I don't think he ever gets any sleep because he's always doing email and he's always doing DeveloperWorks, and the poor guy works 24/7. But he is the guy on IBM HTTP server, powered by Apache 9.0 and 855, and he knows it all. He's very good. So if you want to catch him, go to DeveloperWorks. He's also heavily involved in these papers that are mentioned up here as well. But he is an excellent resource, and he's the fabulous guy that has really spent a lot of time trying to help customers do this in ZOS. And his end game is that he wants people to use his IBM HTTP server, so he's got skin in the game, and he does help. So excellent resource in that way, too. So IBM DeveloperWorks is another thing to use. OK. All right. So I've spent a lot of time on this, but believe me, I would spend 59 minutes on this if you guys had any questions, because this is really the most important part of 2.2. Everything else, if you're not affected by number 1, big sigh of relief, because this is the biggest migration action we have in 2.2. OK?
10 a.m. Europe 2 tomorrow.
Which, by the way, tomorrow, Ed Webb is giving a user experience session on moving from Domino to IBM HTTP Server. I wish I could go to it, but I have to present at that specific time. We are up against each other, so. Yeah, no, go to Ed's session. It's good. Ed has done this as well. He's giving a user experience session on moving from Domino to Apache. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm hoping you're very gentle with us, please. It can be easy. It can be difficult. It depends on what you're using. It really is dependent on what you are doing and what you need to do. So I can't tell you that it's going to be easy, and I can't tell you that everyone's going to have it difficult. I'm hoping that maybe even a lot of people aren't even affected by it. I do know that some people have run this health check, and I've seen a lot of them come back and say, I'm clean. I don't have to do this. And then they have avoided all of this chart, which is nice. Question? Another comment. Yeah, it's IBM DeveloperWorks. DeveloperWorks is one word. If you just go Google it, you can find it. DeveloperWorks, yeah. OK, so let's move on, because that was a rather painful part of the presentation. If you do have any questions about that, let me know. I really want this IBM HTTP server Domino removal to be handled today on 13 and 2.1. Actually, if you're on 13 and you're still migrating to 2.1, I would say that this is still a migration action for you to 2.1, even though it doesn't actually become required until 2.2. It's that important. Okay. OK, so real quick, we have a new price feature in 2.1, the ZEDC, the Z Enterprise Data Compression. I don't really want to talk about this. This is a little bit old for us at this point, but if you're coming from 13 to 2.1, you'll see a new priced feature. An IFA PRD, it will be enabled, disabled with the feature name ZEDC, depending on whether you've ordered it or not. OK, so if you go look in your IFA PRD, you'll see this new thing there, and that's what this one is. If you are interested in exploiting ZEDC, we always like to know what the fixed cat names are. And so the fixed cat is ibm.function.zedc. Okay, so just to keep an eye on that if you're interested in using that new priced feature. A big item that we had coming in ZOS 2.1, those of you coming from 13 to 2.2, you haven't seen this yet, is we now have this new base element called the font collection, and we've tossed some fonts into something and called it a font collection, and we're shipping it to you. And so here's a list of all the fonts that you'll have with this last one here, the world type fonts. The world type fonts are more Unix type of fonts, and these have never existed before on the ZOS product. And so now we have done the port of them ourselves, and we've put it into the operating system, as well as included other interesting fonts as well, and put that into the thing called the ZOS font collection. Okay, so world type fonts are going to be different kinds of fonts that you've had in the past, mainly because you've never had them. Next thing, because they're Unix. And then the next thing is because they're Unix, they go into a file system. Okay? So here are the data set names, the PDS data set names that we're going to incorporate into ZOS. You probably have seen these data sets before for your fonts. These are old ones. They're new to ZOS, but they previously existed outside of ZOS before. So there they are right there. And then here's the one in the bottom, the user LPP fonts world type IBM. That's where those brand new fonts are coming. So now we have fonts in a file system. Never had that before. Okay, this is cool stuff. So you got to be prepared for that on ZOS release 13. This is a font file data set. It is rather large. Some of these fonts are rather large, and so we decided to break it off into its own separate font file data set. In ZOS 2.1, we now have a new file system we ship, and it's about 2,000 cylinders, and it contains those fonts. Question? Okay, so the question is, what is the name of the book that I need to use to refer to the fonts that are in these font collection? There is a font collection book that's in ZOS. Okay, we're going to have to take that question offline. The question is, how do I have PSF reference these fonts? Again, that's a little, let me take that one offline, if you don't mind, okay? Especially these old data sets, you've already got references to them today. This is the same name. This is all what you've had before. Okay, so Withdrawn, okay? So that's new stuff, right? New stuff coming in, a lot of new stuff coming in 2.1, a lot of new stuff coming in 2.2. If you're coming from 13 to 2.1, you've missed what we took out in 2.1. I'll just cover the flame items. You guys know me in my presentations. If it's a fire, that means I personally think it's a rather important thing that you should look at. If it's a red check mark here, that means that there is a IBM Health Checker for ZOS check that can accompany it to help you determine whether you're going to be using a function that's not there anymore. So I would recommend that you use Health Checker in order to see if that withdrawal is affecting you or not. So let's just look at the fire items for the sake of time. The first one is that ZFS multi-file system aggregates are completely and finally gone as of ZOS 2.1. Took us many releases to finally get the whole thing out, but it's really all out. Everybody should be using compatibility mode aggregates. By the way, in ZOS 2.1, ZFS always had the term aggregate associated with it. And what we're trying to do in 2.1 and onwards is trying to replace the word aggregate with the word file system. So instead of seeing the word ZFS aggregate now in places, you might see the term ZFS file system. It's exactly the same thing, but now that we don't have multi-file system aggregates anymore, we just have compatibility mode aggregates, we now can use the word file system more accurately. Okay? I'm not going to change commands and syntax and parms that still say agger. But you know, to make even things more confusing, you'll now have two terms for the same thing. So keep that in mind. The biggest migration action in 2.1 is the bpx.default.user removal. Hopefully everybody's heard and seen and run this check and read everything in Hot Topics about it. I have found that in ZOS 2.1, this is the single largest migration action that causes people work to do. Some people have it to do, and some people don't have it to do. So it depends. Okay, use this check to find out whether you're affected or not. And then the last fire item that I have is that we have some Windows-based tools for Capacity Provisioning Manager and for Communication Server. And these Windows-based tools also have coordinating plugin functions in ZOSMF. And so we had two ways of doing the same thing. What we did in ZOS 2.1 is we don't have support anymore, and there's no updates to the Windows-based tools, and you need to use it from ZOSMF. So I put a fire here just to make sure that if you have a dependency on using these tools on Windows and you want to continue to use the latest level of the tools, you've got to move to ZOSMF in 2.1. Okay, so that's why I put the fire there, because you have a new functional dependency that you need to satisfy in 2.1. One of the saddest withdrawals I've been encountering is the documentation withdrawal of Book Manager books in 2.1. I'm still lamenting that today. We have Knowledge Center and we have PDFs. Okay? If you want to get to the 2.1 Knowledge Center, there's the link for it then. We do not have the Knowledge Center for 2.2 books out there, or at least I have never found them yet. They should be out there soon. But we do have the 2.2 PDFs out there. So you can go and get the 2.2 PDFs. I've put the link for that on IBM main and some other spots, and it's also in your handout if you need to see that. Okay? So that's what's happening with Book Manager books in 2.1 being moved. The question is, are we going to offer an ISO image to burn for these books? We do offer within the Publication Center zipped PDFs. So it's not an ISO image, it is a zipped PDF. And if you go to the IBM Publication Center, I recommend you search on that letter right there. Don't search on this term, it's too general. The zipped PDFs are all in separate section. I thought that they were all zipped together in one PDF. Okay. Okay, so if you want them kind of in one fell swoop, go to the Publication Center and get them from here, or you can learn how to use Knowledge Center. All right, I'll keep moving from that one. Okay, elements and functions that are withdrawn from 2.2. Book Manager build, we did take that off. Book Manager read remains in ZOS. You can still read Book Manager books. You just can't create any new ones. So build is, Book Manager build is gone. And this is the sad one that I spent a lot of time on that I really needed to spend a lot of time on was the Domino IBM Http Server removed in 2.2. The next one I'll talk about is the JES to Z2 checkpoint level. That is being removed in ZOS 2.2, and you've got to get to the Z11 checkpoint level if you are not already there. I think most people are probably already there, but officially you're not going to be able to use Z2 in ZOS 2.2. Okay. And then there are some removers for TCP IP devices, and they do have a health check that you can verify if you're using that. That's nice. The comm server people, when they do deprecate certain devices or function, they've been really good about creating health checks for that. So use those comm server health check to help you, because they usually are taking away an assortment of things and it's hard to find out exactly what they're doing. Just use the check. Okay, so future. I like to look forward at what's coming out in the future too.
Are these health checkers available on
Okay. So the question is, are these checks available on ZOS Release 13 and even on 2.1? And the answer is absolutely they are, because you have to detect early whether you have it removed. So yeah, the health checks have been put into a PTF, and I'll show you in a second how to identify the PTFs that they've been put into with fixed cats, right? Okay. So I like to look in the future. What are we taking out? So in some future release, we're removing some more communication server function that you can see here. Console shared mode coming out of the BCP in the release after 2.2, which just for convenience sake here, I'm going to call it 2.3. So we got one more release after 2.2 before we take out shared mode, and you've got to be in distributed mode. I think everybody, is anybody still using shared mode? I think everybody's in distributed mode. Okay, good. Excellent. Question. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Yeah. Okay, so we have it's not. Okay, so the question is, the health check that we have to detect HFSs and encourage you to move the HFSs to ZFS. There is a health check out there today. The question was, is the health check going away? No, the health check's not going away. Okay. Okay, now I knew that that's what you were getting at, because it really wasn't the check you wanted to know about. You wanted to know what the check was checking for. No, HFSs are still supported in ZOS 2.2, just as they were in 2.1, just as they were in ZOS Release 13. And we haven't said anything about the future of that, just that they're not strategic, they're still serviced, they're still there. 2.2 has HFS. We still have the check in the product to remind you to gently move to ZFSs. Okay, I thought that's what you were really getting at. Yeah. Okay, so I call this the arrow chart because it kind of tells us where we are in the world. So we're the red line that's right about here. If you are interested in ordering ZOS 2.1, marketing is going to end on that January 25th of next year. And if you're interested in getting 2.2, it's going to be orderable not that far away from now, and then that's a 2-year release. So that's how that goes out. And then here are a couple of, this is my symbol for web deliverables. So since 2.1, we've had 2 crypto web deliverables, and then 1 Z13 XLC C++ support web deliverable go out. Okay. So speaking of cryptos, they've had a lot of crypto web deliverables. We've had a lot of different levels. This is why it's probably easiest to talk to it in terms of FMIDs. So in ZOS 2.2, I said that we're going to have HCR77 Baker 0 that's available out there. And then depending on which level of ZOS you're coming from, and even if you use the one that was in the base or you installed a cryptographic support web deliverable, that's going to depend on what migration actions you have to do for crypto. I don't know where you're coming from because it's such a mix and match environment, but I can tell you that if you're going to 2.2 right now, it's going to be HCR77 Baker 0. Okay, so keep that in mind. A quick chart about the popular no-charge products. So these don't have a price associated with them. First of all, Ported Tools. Ported Tools is your friend because it contains the IBM Http Server 8.5.5 level, which is going to help you get off of Domino to Apache 855 today, right? So you need to get that one. The XML toolkit's still out there at release 10. That's getting kind of old, and that's the level. That's the latest one we have. And then you can see these are all of the Java levels that we have available for ordering with ZOS 2.2. And there's a lot of them. You can order any and all if you want, right? There's a lot. Now, this one right here that I tried to highlight, this is the one that you're going to need for ZOS MF, and this is the one where we have that bypassable ordering requisite for. Okay? And I'll show you in a little bit that there's other products or other functions within ZOS that also need that particular level as well. So you know, minimally I would order that one because that's the one that we want you to run. That's the one that ZOS MF is going to need. But you can also order all of these other ones as well. They all can live together fine. Separate file system paths, everything. Okay? Service policy for ZOS Release 13, we've announced that it's going to go out of service in September of next year. So you guys that are on 13, you're planning now for 2.2, I hope, right? And so you're getting here, and this is why you're good to be at this session. So you need to be off 13 by September of next year, unless you want to pay us for the opportunity to give you corrective service or, you know, just be unsupported, your choice. So ZOS 2.1 is planned to be end of service September 2018, which is a 5-year release. And remember, in September 2018 is when that migration dual IHSA accommodation would run out at that period of time as well, okay? So September 2018 would be the date to keep an eye on for that, okay? That's the planned date. It has not been announced when it's going into service, but all I did is I took the GA date and I added 5 years, and that's the anticipated date. For ZOS 2.2, that's going to GA in September 2015, and then I add 5 years to that, so that means we get out to end of service on September 2020. Okay. For Coexistence, no new news here. 3 consecutive releases are going to be supported for Coexistence migration and fallback with ZOS 2.2. So the 3 releases you can have are 13, 2.1, and 2.2. Okay, if you're on 12, I didn't see anybody on 12, but 12 just had 3 releases as well. But 12 won't stretch to 2.2. So for positioning for ZOS 2.2, let's talk about, you know, you got to read the usual suspects. You got to go read the books. But you also need to take into consideration a little bit about the size about ZOS, because I told you we've removed stuff and we've added stuff. What's it going to do to the footprint of ZOS itself? So these are numbers that we gather every release, and it is just of the ZOS operating system itself. It's no other program products. It's not Java, right? It's not PSF. It's not other things. It's not XML. It's not HTTP server. It's just ZOS, both JESs, and all the languages as well. So if we look at a comparison between the last 3 releases, remember we saw a big hike in the target library PDS and PDSEs jumping up in ZOS 2.1. Okay, this was caused by Unicode, and it was also caused by the fonts libraries. We saw a new font file system coming in 2.1. Okay, so if you guys that are already on 2.1, what's happening between 2.1 and 2.2? Well, the target library PDS and PDSEs are remaining approximately the same, so that's fine. We didn't see a big increase in PDS and PDSEs for target libraries. For root file system, we do see an increase here. Okay, we're moving up to about 5,200 cylinders, depending on whether you use HFS or ZFS. Okay, and that's coming from at about 3,300. So not quite doubling. Okay, and what is that? That's a lot of the functions that you saw, KC for Z, ZOSMF, right? A lot of those functions that you saw, they all hit the file system, OpenSSH. Right, those are all file system type of products, so that's where a lot of the new functions are going. And then the font file system, it didn't change since 2.1, so it's exactly the same way as it was before. Okay, Joe?
Yeah, since they have grown like this, like right now I have 5, all my res packs are 5 packs. Can I use mod 27?
Yeah, so the question is, can I use a mod 27 for a sysres? And the answer is yeah. Why aren't you doing it by now, right? Yeah. That's what we do. Our sysres is a mod 27. Yeah, you can do it now. That's what I'm trying to get you to do, is to move to a bigger geometry so it's easier to manage if you have one larger sysres. Okay, so we'll talk about system requirements now. And I wanted to talk just really briefly about driving system requirements. In order to install ZOS 2.2, you need a system. And that system just can be at ZOS release 13 or higher. Okay, so there's nothing really interesting there. I will show you on the next chart about electronic delivery, though. Okay, everybody's been mentioning it this week at Share, and I'm going to say it again. I'll put it on a chart just so that everybody has been disclosed that this is going to happen, and you need to prepare for it. Okay, we'll talk about target system requirements and coexistence system requirements as well. Okay, so you need to think about system requirements, and there's a lot of different kinds of requirements. So the requirement for electronic delivery. Okay. We had good old standard FTP, and everybody used it, and everyone probably loved it, but it wasn't secure, and so we need to get rid of it, and we have announced the intention to get rid of it in the first quarter of 2016. That's not that far from now. Okay, so if you're not using a secure electronic delivery method, like number 2, FTP using secure socket layer, HTTP using secure socket layer, or even if you like download director, that's fine too. That'll work as well. So if you haven't decided how you're going to get off of standard FTP today, I would recommend you do that right away. Okay? It will affect you probably because there is some sort of an electronic delivery you probably get affixes or products from IBM, and that will be affected by this. So even if you just do receive order command, you're going to be affected. So you need to plan for this, and you need to decide on your secure electronic delivery method, and you need to have it in place before first quarter of 2016. Go to this download site to do a test, okay, to make sure that you've got it set up end-to-end correctly. For target system hardware requirements, you guys might have heard, I think John might have mentioned it, John Niels might have mentioned it, that ZOS 2.2, it needs to IPL on a Z10 or higher. Okay, Z10 or higher. Anybody here not at least on a Z10? Okay, you are not going to be able to IPL 2.2 until you move up your server level. Okay. Okay, so for software requirements for ZOS 2.2, we'll talk about coexistence in a second, but I do want to talk a little bit about a target system software requirements, because they're documented a little bit differently now in the ZOS Planning for Installation book. Okay? So the statement is, generally, you can use what you were using on ZOS Release 13 and what you were using on ZOS 2.1. As long as it's service supported, generally, it'll be supported on ZOS 2.2. Okay, that's the good news. Okay, so generally, you're okay. However, you know, here's the exceptions now. However, there are a list of a couple of functions that need higher versions of products or even PTFs on products in order to run, right? So if you're going to use a specific function, that function may require that that other program product have a higher level or a higher PTF, okay? So look in the Planning for Install book for the functions that need something higher than the general one that was just service supported. Okay, so you got that. Also, generally, we have an overall dependency in ZOS that we need Java Technology Edition 7.1, either the 31 or 64-bit flavor, depending on what functions you're going to be using. So if you want to know like what level of Java you need for ZOS 2.2, generally it is the 7.1 level, although there are some older functions in ZOS 2.2 that existed in 2.1 and in 13 and in 12 and in 10. These are old functions, and those will still run with older levels of Java if you need them to. Okay? But generally, the new functions that we have that are Java dependent, they all were written and tested and work with Java 7.1. Okay, so that's why you'll see on that one slide I highlighted Java 7.1, because most functions that you'll see in the next slide are going to need Java 7.1. Okay, so I'll show you that slide now. So here's the functions that I have selected here. This is not all of the function, but it's a lot of them, okay, from the Planning for Install book. I took the ones that I thought were very popular or the ones that you might want to see, and I put them in the slide. And so here I have, like for ZOSMF, I need 64-bit Java 7.1. And you can't really see it on this chart, but in the middle of this chart, this is actually blue. And these are kind of like the non-Java dependencies for particular functions, you know, like the SNMT NetView client support, or full exploitation support for member generations with ISPF, things like that. But if you look at the ones that are non-blue, ZOSMF, PFA, KC for Z, InfoPrint Central, those need all that general Java 7.1 level that we have, okay? So that's what you can see. Now, all PTFs that are needed on other products for ZOS 2.2 have thankfully been marked with a fixcat so that you can do SMP report missing fix commands using this fixcat that you see here. I'll show you an example in a second. And that will help you get the correct PTF level. Okay. Also, you can look at the support lifecycle website to see if your product that you're running today on 13 or 2.1 is service supported, because that was the general thing I told you at the beginning. Generally, if it's service supported, it will still run, so you need to know it's still service supported. However, my personal favorite is to use ZOSMF's software management report that can easily identify the products that you're running on your system when their end of service is. Okay, so that's a more customized and automatic way of knowing what products you have on your system are approaching or at end of service. And that will help you position for 2.2 because you know if they're end of service, you know you need to upgrade them. And that is a really nice way. If you haven't used the software management report yet, you can come to the lab on Thursday and we can give you that lab to do. It's nice. Okay, so let's just show real quick the syntax for doing target system PTF verification. So here's a real example. I went out and cut and pasted from Omegamon ZOS 5.3. You need this particular PTF, the resolver here, and you can see the category has been tagged with ZOS, Target System Required Service, ZOS 2.2. And then you run the report missing fix using this syntax. Notice that I put the zone to my Omegamon zone, okay? Because I'm going to be checking within Omegamon what Omegamon PTFs I need, so I need to point to the Omegamon zone. And then here's the syntax that I put here for the fixcat I need. Hopefully everybody knows this. My recommendation is don't just run this one time and say that you've got it done. This is something that you have to run occasionally, right? Every 2 weeks, I don't know, every month, something more than once, right? I would run it more often, especially as you approach moving ZOS 2.2 through your organization. Also for coexistence PTFs, it's very, very similar, right? Here's a little snippet of a ZOS 2.1 PTF that we need here. And this time when I run my report missing fix, I'm pointing it to my ZOS 2.1 coexistence, because that's the system I'm going to coexist 2.2 with. And so here's the coexistence fixcat that I'm interested in. And then here is the function health checker fixcat. This is where all those PTFs that detect the removal of function that I showed you at the slides at the beginning of the session, those PTFs have all been tagged with IBM function health checker. So when you're doing coexistence PTFs for your ZOS 2.1 system, put on the appropriate migration health checks as well, which have been identified with that health check. That's a good idea. Okay. So this is pretty usual, but I just wanted to tell you the new syntax and also to recommend that you do it right now for your planning. Okay, so I wanted to give a little overall chart at this point in the presentation because I've probably given you way too much information. But we do want to think about removed stuff. That's the biggest thing for planning with BPX default.user coming out in 2.1. That's the biggest one. And then the domino to Apache move in ZOS 2.2. We've got a bunch of fixcats that we've thrown at you that it's good idea to run a report right now. And also, I want to talk a little bit about health checks now and workflows to help you with your migration. So here are all of the associated health checks that we have. We have 29 health checks that can help you move from 13 to 2.2 or 2.1 to 2.2. Okay, the ones in purple are for particular crypto levels. This is for a crypto web deliverable that was out there in case if you've already gone past it, then you don't need to have that level. And then I put this one in blue right here, and I put a fire on it because this one is not available in a PTF, so it doesn't have the fixcats associated with it because it's not in a PTF. You have to pull that one from the web, and it's really important that you pull it for the web because we're getting back to that whole chart where I said decide if you've got this as a problem. That health check will tell you whether you have this as a problem. Go get that number 29 blue health check and run it today. Okay. Okay, so now let's talk about workflow, because I'm real excited about ZOSMF coming in ZOS, always being there, but also I'm excited about in ZOSMF 2.1, we had the workflow function. And I know a lot of you have come to the ZOSMF lab and you've become a little bit familiar with workflow, but just a couple of weeks ago, I put out the ZOSMF or ZOS 2.2 migration workflow. Okay, now what is that? That's a really cool thing. So if you have ZOSMF 2.1 today, and you have workflow today, I have a workflow that I can give you, and you can use my workflow, or not mine, it's my team's workflow, right? So you can use my team's workflow and put it in your ZOSMF 2.1 system, and you can use that workflow instead of the migration book. Because everything that's in the book is in the workflow. Okay? This is a big thing, right? It's much easier, I think, to use that migration workflow than it is to use the migration book. Okay? Because when you're in the workflow, you can mark migration actions as not applicable, you can skip them, you can assign them to people, all the things that you've seen in the lab going on with workflows. So I would suggest that if you are a ZOSMF 2.1 user, that you don't even use the migration book. Right? Go get the workflow, load it in, use it right from ZOSMF itself. Okay? Now there are some enhancements in the 2.2 workflow that I didn't have in the 2.1 workflow. First of all is I can now invoke health checks from the workflow. Now remember I showed you the 29 health checks or so that we have that are associated with migration actions? Well now, in the workflow, on that particular migration action, I can go and invoke the health check and look at the return or the response on the health check, do an analysis on it, and I can tell you whether that migration step is required or not, right? So I can mark the step is completed or done or skipped based on what I see within the analysis of that health check. So now you don't even need to, mess with it yourself, which is nice. So that's the first enhancement that we have in the 2.2 migration workflow. And the second enhancement that we have is feedback. Because I'd like to know where you're having problems or where you're not having problems either within the ZOS migration. So for every single step in the workflow, I just ask very quick questions about, did it affect you? Did you have problems with it? Were there impacts? And that's about it, right? A very quick thing. You can probably get through the feedback on each step in maybe 10, 15 seconds if you wanted to. And then you can optionally, if you want to, send it back to IBM. It goes right to me. And then we can look at, where people are having problems within the migration. Okay, so I would welcome you to provide feedback if you wish, and then also send it to us so that we can aggregate it all together and find out where there's problems. So I just want to show you in some visuals what that looks like. First of all, I can tell that I'm on ZOSMF 2.1 because this is the old school way of what it looks like, right? But that's good because I'm on ZOSMF 2.1 and I'm going to 2.2, right? That's my scenario here. And so here what you'll see, even though it's very hard to see on the Perform tab, you'll see a little mini wizard. And this mini wizard will submit a job to run the health check. It'll do the analysis of the health check. And then based on that analysis, it'll mark the step as appropriate or not, right? Whether you have to do it or whether you don't have to do it. Okay, so that's what that one looks like. And then here's an optional feedback screenshot that you can see for doing the migration. And there also is an overall migration one that if you want to go to the very last step of the workflow and tell me what you think about your whole release migration coming from 2.1 to 2.2, all in general, you can put anything you want in there. There's comment field. You can put as much information as you want. You can put your name. You can not put your name, whatever you want to do. You can turn it in. You cannot turn it in, whatever you like. Okay, so we have health checks and feedback now on the workflow. And again, if you're already on ZOSMF 2.1, I would recommend you don't use the book. Go right to the workflow. Okay. There's a very small migration action for Server Pack. If you haven't already done it, just make sure that your dialog is at the level that you see here, 26 or higher. You can look at that when you might have had it. I did want to mention a couple of new Server Pack install enhancements. There's always Server Pack enhancements going on. Some of the big areas in Server Pack have been always, as always, help to do setup of ZOSMF, and that is still continuing in ZOS 2.2. Also, there's support if you want to use SMF log streams. Server Pack can help you set that up, or SMF data sets if you'd like on the full system replace path. Also, this has been a very popular one, is that sometimes we ship server packs, and depending on what products you've ordered, the file system was larger than 4 gigabytes. And we also encourage you to have a ZFS. But if we give you a file system that was going to be a ZFS and it was larger than 4 gigabytes in size, up until ZOS 2.1, it had to be SMS managed. And I don't know about you, but I really don't prefer to have SMS managed file systems for my system data sets. And so that wasn't good. So in ZOS 2.1, we had the ability to have non-SMS managed ZFS file systems that are larger than 4 gig. And that wasn't advertised very well. So what we have in Server Pack is exploitation of that to allow you to have in your Server Pack, if you have a large file system, you want to make it a ZFS, and you do not want to SMS manage it, you can now do that within Server Pack itself. However, you have to define an SMS data class with the extended attributes that you can see there. It doesn't mean that it's going to be SMS managed. It just means you have to have a data class.
You just have the data class. You don't have to put it in this folder.
Exactly. The comment was you just have to have the data class. You don't have to make it SMS managed, and that's absolutely correct. And I've already complained to DFSMS that I should have that on the idcams command, and I don't want to have that in a data class. And they have listened to me. So I don't know what they're going to do with it, but I have complained. Why do I have to have a data class to do this when I should just be able to do it in the idcams myself? And they said, all right. So I don't know what's happening with it, but I have registered my comment to them. And if you want to register your comment to them as well, that might help. So the last thing is they provide setup for Knowledge Center KC for Z right within Server Pack itself. As I said, these are simple jobs. These are easy to use. If you're going to want to use KC for Z, use the jobs in Server Pack. And then summary. I've done a lot of talking today, but everybody should know what's the biggest thing in 2.2? Domino to Apache. How are you going to get there? You're going to go from Domino to 855 today on 13 or on 2.1. And then when you get 2.2, just make the smaller move from H55 to 9.0. And if you're very concerned about that, we have that dual running option for 855 and 9.0 on 2.2. However, I don't even know if you're going to be able to, or not be able to. I'm not sure if you even need to use it, because from 855 to 9.0, there really is not a lot of migration work in order to do. But if you wanted to have it, you could have it in order to keep your migration moving forward to 2.2. Okay, so the big amount of work is to get it from Domino to 855. That's the big piece of work. Okay, and then use health checks, use fixed cats, everything. Okay, so do your session evaluation, and hopefully you'll come back in a little while for part 2.
Because we're sharing.